You may be seated. And I do want to thank the City of Fayetteville's Police Department for doing the color guard. We will first have welcomes from Cynthia Taylor, Regional Director, South Region, from the U.S. Department of Justice Community Relations Services Division. And also, as Ms. Cynthia is coming up, I do want to let you know that on the tables are the bios of the persons that are coming up to speak. So if you're interested in their bios, then they are in the middle of each table, and we want to make sure that you at least have an idea of who's speaking in front of you today. We will now present Ms. Cynthia Taylor.
Good morning. It is truly an honor to be here with you today. And again, my name is Cynthia Taylor. I have the privilege of serving as the Regional Director for the South Region, Department of Justice Community Relations Service. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 established the very special region or component that I work for, where we have highly skilled mediators and conciliation specialists such as Sean Barrett, who's standing back there. Sean was very instrumental in helping to put this program together today, and so we want to thank him for that. But our conciliators deploy to communities that have conflicts on the basis of race, national origin, and color. Our mandate was expanded in 2009 with the Shepard-Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act, and we started to address tensions on the basis of gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, and religion. The 4 services that we offer are mediation, conciliation, facilitation, and training. And the training that you're receiving today that we are so honored to have our other federal partners with us today is one of the trainings that we offer. It's timely, the information is relevant, and we hope that you take a lot away from it today. We encourage you to reach out to us if you have something that falls within our jurisdiction, and we'd be happy to serve in your community. So thank you for your presence here today, and we look forward to engaging with you.
Our next person will be the Honorable Mitch Colvin, who is the Mayor of the City of Fayetteville.
Well, good morning to everyone. It's good to see you. A lot of familiar faces and some that are not, but certainly I would like to make sure we acknowledge the elected officials. I see Senator Val Applewhite here with us this morning, North Carolina State Senate. Good morning, Senator Applewhite. Any other elected, the Mayor Pro Tem, Hope Mills Mayor Pro Tem, Dr. McCoy is here. Madam Chairman, Chairwoman from the Cumberland County Commission, Tony Stewart, which will come shortly. I am Mitch Colvin, and I am elated to be here with you this morning to welcome you to our community, to Regional Director Taylor and other members of the U.S. Department of Justice and other organizations. Thank you for choosing Fayetteville as a place. This is, to me, the greatest city in America, I would say, but for sure, one of the most diverse cities that has the greatest past that we have used to transform into a great community of today. You know, as we see some of the headlines that we read today, you know, oftentimes we wonder if this is 2024 or 1924. It seems that doors that have been closed in the past are reopening, and things that we have moved past as a community are back in front of us. But it's because of organizations like this. It is because in the city of Fayetteville, places like Fayetteville, we embrace our diversity. We make sure that our city is inclusive to all citizens, regardless of race, sex, gender, or sexual orientation, or others. So thank you today. Thank you to Dr. Soros for hosting this great event. I see Chief Braden and other members of the Fayetteville City Police Department and staff. And so we look forward to having a great, robust discussion as how we can improve and continue to fight for equality and fairness and equity throughout our communities. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Tony Stewart instead of Glenn Adams, who is the Chairperson? Vice Chair, okay, Vice Chair of the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners.
Good morning, everyone. As he said, I am Dr. Tony Stewart, Vice Chairwoman of the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners, and I bring you greetings on behalf of the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners. Mayor Colvin has already recognized our elected officials. I do see Malik Davis, who was not in the room at the time, so you're good, Mayor Colvin. He wasn't here. It's an honor for the U.S. Department of Justice to host an important hate crime forum here in Fayetteville and Cumberland County. And again, I bring you greetings on behalf of the Board of Commissioners. I would like to thank the U.S. Department of Justice, the Eastern District of U.S. Attorney's Office, and the Fayetteville-Cumberland County Human Relations Department for coming together to address this important issue. Cumberland County is a good place to host an event such as this. We are proud of our diversity here in Cumberland County. It's a jewel in our crown and a feature that makes us attractive for quality of life, for investment, and for arts and culture. Cumberland County takes seriously equal rights and the protection of people. Our commitment to creating and maintaining a workplace free of any form of discrimination comes from the top down. The Cumberland County Board of Commissioners adopted a resolution against racial injustice in June 2020. Actions followed this resolution when we established the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, which advises and guides the county government to ensure integration of diversity, equity, and inclusion with the county's mission, operation, strategies, and business objectives. Here in Cumberland County, our collective differences in the American tenets that all people are created helps us more equally recognize and anticipate bias and hate crimes. We welcome the information and experiences from the panel of law enforcement experts, community resources, and survivors. Equal enforcement of the law is an important part of our commitment to equal rights and equal protection of us all. For those that are visiting from out of town or out of state, I hope you'll take an opportunity to explore, dine, and enjoy the many amenities that we have here in Cumberland County. Again, thank you all for attending, and I look forward to this forum.
Yeah. All right. The next person that you will hear from is Dr. Mark Sorrells, President of the Fayetteville Technical Community College, which, by the way, sir, this is a beautiful college.
So thank you for that introduction, and welcome to Fayetteville Technical Community College. This is your community college. We're here to serve our community. We take a very serious priority around creating opportunity for all citizens. And it is very important that we also try to work and mirror the needs of our community. So one of the three areas that are our highest focus right now is in our cybersecurity, national defense, local and state defense, healthcare, but also public safety. Those are our three largest departments, the departments we put a lot of emphasis and a lot of focus on to really align to the local markets. But we really take the view that all citizens can succeed here at Fayetteville Tech. And so our initiative, and it's led by Dr. DeSandra Washington, is called HUB, Hope, Unity, and Belongingness for All People. And we look and work with our students. We find out where they are, where they want to go, and we take them as far along that journey as they desire to go. We're very excited to have you here today. What you do is fit into the efforts that we're trying to accomplish here on campus. We mirror the community. We are a majority minority serving institution. 61% of our student population is minority. We are proud of that. We're probably the most diverse community college in the state of North Carolina, and one of the top diverse community colleges, two-year institutions in the country. We also are very, very proud of the work that we do on the public sector and with our military. We're a top 10 military-friendly and military spouse-friendly institution in the country. And we've been that way for 15 years, and we will stay that way. We're very proud of this community. I will tell you, 35 years I've worked in the economically disadvantaged areas of North Carolina, and I've lived all over this state. Fayetteville, North Carolina, yes, is the most diverse, but in my opinion, is the most united community around purpose and around really economic activity. And I am very proud to be a citizen of Fayetteville County, North Carolina and Cumberland County, because it is what this country should strive to be, united and inclusive in everything we do. Thank you for being here today. I hope you will take an opportunity to kind of go out into the lobby area. You will see a gaggle of students because we are creating a community here, an area where, as Dr. Keene used to say, our students get in their car, they come to class, and they get in their car and they leave. We're going to get them in their car, they're going to come to class, and they're going to stay on campus during that day and have a lot of fun and engage and have that experience that so many of them desire. So again, thank you for being here. I look forward to hearing from some of the speakers because the things you're doing, this conversation is such an important conversation. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Yamil Nazar, who is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director, City of Fayetteville, Cumberland County, Human Relations Department.
Buenos dias, everybody. So for those of you who are with us on Tuesday, you're going to hear me repeat a little bit of some things that I said then. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Yes, my title does not fit on a business card, just so you know. I want to do some thank yous first and some recognitions. First and foremost, I want to thank my staff. I cannot tell you how many times I tell people that I would not be able to pull any of this off if it wasn't for the people who work with me. I'm going to start with Deanna Curtis, who's standing in the back with sunglasses. The sunglasses are for medical reasons. And then Yamile Padilla, who this is her second week with us. And Zoe Butler, who she's outside. So thank you. I also want to thank my commissioners. I've seen, oh yes, please. Ooh. I also want to thank my commissioners that are here today. I have seen Mr. Milton, who is our current chairperson. I saw Demetria Murphy, who is our current vice chairperson. Commissioner Crystal Edmonds, who is currently our secretary. I thought I saw, and Ms. Francis, who is a commissioner. So thank you, commissioners. Oh, and wait a minute, Donna Pelham is here. She's a commissioner, and one of our former chairpersons, Sheila Cuffey, is also here. So thank you all for your support. I also want to thank the mayor and the elected officials in the room for supporting human relations as much as you do. I know you all come very often to all things human relations, and it is highly appreciated. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of Fayetteville. In 1783, the towns of Cross Creek and Campbellton merged, and because of Marquis de Lafayette's support of the American cause during the American Revolution, the city was named Fayetteville. If you watch the original Hamilton, he is played by Daveed Diggs. The North Carolina General Assembly convened in Fayetteville in 1789 and ratified the Constitution. In 1831, a fire broke out in downtown Fayetteville, and among 600 buildings that were destroyed was the town house. It was replaced by the Market House. The Market House has both a positive historical story and a dark and negative history. Between 1832 and 1865, we have identified various advertisements for the sale of enslaved persons. The bricklayer and real estate speculator was a free African American who lived in Fayetteville. His name, Johnny Patterson. In 2021, City Council asked the Human Relations Department to assist with finding out how the community wants to repurpose the Market House. And the United States Department of Justice was a partner agency with us when we implemented City Spirit and brought in community members to talk about how to repurpose, how do they want to see the house repurposed. COVID made us have to shrink the audience down to 50 people. So we had 2 of them. But then City Council said, we need more input. So the commission and the department went out and we surveyed, had public engagements as well as digital surveys for more than 500 of our residents to how to repurpose this Market House. We are now implementing the first 2 things that the community asked for, was to make the Market House ADA accessible and to make it more pedestrian safe. So we are in the midst of that. Because I have the microphone, and because I have sweat, tears, and blood for these 2 events that we had this week, I'm going to take a moment of privilege. I want to also do a thank you to the FTCC staff. The staff on this campus is amazing. They have been with us since Monday, making sure that these 2 events went off without any mistakes. So Amanda, Joe, Justin, Tammy, Janan, thank you, and others. There were many others. I didn't catch everybody's names, but you all have made me proud. Thank you. I'm going to talk about somebody that most of us in North Carolina who work in human relations know. This person, I've known this person since I arrived in North Carolina in 1999. For the past few months, we've been working together to plan the National Association of Human Rights Workers Conference, which took place here on Tuesday and Wednesday. And then we've also been planning this event. The last 2 days, I have learned things about the impact that this person makes on our state. I learned that he assisted 5 commissions to be formed in different jurisdictions of the state of North Carolina. He goes out when we have new directors, he goes out and he helps train them in order to do this work and trains their commissions in order to do this work. He shares information with us about things that are going on across the state. The impact of this man's work, his knowledge, his dedication, and I think sometimes underappreciated. The importance of the state of North Carolina's Community Relations Division is one that we can never say thank you enough to. Please give a heartfelt thank you for his work, his commitment, and his dedication to this state, Mr. Gene Troy.
I don't know what to say, but thank you. Let's move forward. We will now hear from Ms. Sheila Cuffey, who is a commissioner with the North Carolina Human Relations Commission's Board.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Fayetteville, North Carolina. And if you're from this home, you would say Fayetteville. You wouldn't say Fayetteville, it would be Fayetteville. And so we welcome each and every one of you today to the home of Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, the home of the mighty 82nd Airborne Division and the 18th Airborne Corps, our war fighters, the people that the nation calls on first when there's an emergency around the world. And so this is our home. This is where I grew up. This is my heart. Fayetteville is my heart. And so being with the military with my husband and traveling around the world, this is where we landed for our retirement. And so I welcome you to my home. I hope that you enjoy what we have planned for you. This committee has worked hard for the past few months. That includes our Human Relations, State Human Relations Office, which Mr. Eckberg, Jonathan Eckbland, please stand. Mr. Gene Troy, as you've already seen. Our attorney stepped out, Richard Bolden. I wanted to acknowledge the work that they continue to do. Where is he? He's in the back. There he is. He's getting coffee over there. And to my surprise, the chair is right here, Nick Burns. So I thank you all for attending today. And we couldn't have done this. I was excited when I heard that they wanted to have a hate crimes forum in the state of North Carolina. Now, I'm a boots on the ground type of person. And so if it's an event, I want to be in the midst of planning. And so it was my desire for us to be here in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And so I am grateful to the Human Relations Department for stepping in and saying, yeah, let's do this thing. And so we have brought you all together. So I'm going to ask the Human Relations Department and the Human Relations Commissioners to all stand from Fayetteville, North Carolina. I'm going to ask the Department of Justice members who have been on the planning committee, if you don't mind, Michelle and Sean and everyone else, please stand. And so we could not have done this without the work of these individuals, and we thank them for their support. When I was growing up, there were two words that couldn't be said in my household, as far as my grandmother was concerned anyway, and that was, I'm bored, because if you said you're bored, the B word, she found something for you to do. She did not like that word. And the second word was hate. She did not like that word, and we were not allowed to use hate. And if we did, we had to explain ourselves. You got some explaining to do. So hate was one of those words that was not permitted in her house. And so today, as we come together, I think about my grandmother. I think about my grandfather who served in World War II, and to liberate people on another continent, only to return here and be turned away for jobs and spat upon and different things of that, and not have his freedoms during that Reconstruction era. And so I think about them. I think about me as growing up in New Haven, Connecticut, transferring to an all-white school, and they wouldn't play with me because my hair didn't bounce like their hair bounced. I was different. And the teacher didn't make them play with me. And so I felt like I needed a hero. Maybe if Mighty Mouse swooped down, he could make that teacher make them play with me. But that didn't happen. Mighty Mouse never came, and I didn't have a hero. But today we have an opportunity to educate each other and be allies, because that's what I needed, was an ally. I needed that teacher to be an ally, not my hero, but just an ally to speak up. And so today, as we learn about hate crimes, as we learn what the true definition of it is, remember, it just starts with small microaggressions. It starts with discrimination as young people, as with older people. I pray today that those same little girls have changed. I don't know where they are in this world. I hope that they are teaching their children and grandchildren how to love and how to accept others. That is my desire for this world, to be united and that we not have to deal with hate. But we see in this current atmosphere that there's a lot of hate being spewed. And so today, we hope that we give you the tools to be out and the resources to go out and to help others. And so thank you for coming. Welcome to Fayetteville, North Carolina.
I want to acknowledge this and who's in the audience this morning. She's not on the program, but I do want to acknowledge her, and that is the North Carolina Senator Val Applewhite, who is the senator for this district, District 19, and she is in the House today. We're going to move forward, and we're going to move forward to our first panel. Our first panel will consist of the moderator, who is Jennifer May Parker, Chief Counsel for Litigation, the U.S. Attorney's Office, Eastern District of North Carolina, and she's located in Raleigh. If you would start moving towards the podium. The panelists are Kimberl Braden, Chief of Police, City of Fayetteville's Police Department, Fayetteville, North Carolina. Kaylee Tabor, Senior District Attorney, District Attorney's Office, Cumberland County Prosecutorial District 14, Fayetteville, North Carolina. And Samantha Oubre, Special Agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI, you know those letters, the FBI office out of Raleigh, North Carolina. Give up a hand for all of them today.
So you probably can't see my name tag, but you heard my name, and I thank you very much for having me here to moderate this panel. It is my privilege to be here and to be with this very distinguished panel, and we hope that the conversation that we will have today will certainly enlighten you and inform you of these very, very important matters. Part of my duties as Chief Counsel for Litigation at the U.S. Attorney's Office is to supervise a team of attorneys who are our civil rights prosecutors. They're here today, and part of what they do is to prosecute these types of cases in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So this discussion is very near and dear to our hearts, and we hope that we are conveying really good information to you this morning. So let's get the conversation started. We have an hour to fill, and I have no doubt that the panel here can exceed that, but I'll keep them honest as far as the time is concerned. So let's jump right into it. First question, I guess we should start from the beginning. Tell us briefly, what is a hate crime or a bias incident?
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to provide the answer to that first question. I apologize. My write-up is pretty short. If anybody wants to talk more after, I can tell you a little bit more about what I do at the FBI. But I am an investigator, and I specifically investigate civil rights crimes, which includes hate crimes or allegations of hate crimes in this part of North Carolina. So whenever we talk to members of the public about hate crimes, we try not to get too specific and too nuanced or too into the weeds about the federal statutes, because we want to put that on our attorneys to make the decision, does this count as a hate crime, or is this more in the realm of hate speech, which, there's a fine line there. So just for a very short definition of a hate crime, I would say it is a traditional crime motivated by bias, not necessarily hate, and that is it's a misconception. It doesn't have to be hate, but bias. was this person chosen because of their membership of a protected class, whether that's national origin, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, race, or disability status. So if a person, but for the fact that this person was a member of the protected class, they would not have been targeted for this crime. So that's sort of the calculus that we do, but again, we don't need to get too hung up on the actual definition of what counts as a hate crime or as hate speech. If it feels like a crime that seems to be motivated by a bias against a protected class, please just let us know, and we'll get more into reporting in just a little bit.
So let's go to the next question then, and what should people do if they believe they have seen or been victims of a hate crime incident? And that's to all of the panelists. Chief?
So, by the definition, you know, it starts with the crime. I think the first thing you do is you go through the reporting process and you give those factual statements as to what happened. And during that process, you know, we can start to begin to see if it does fit closer to the definition that was just given. And it's usually not going to be defined by the incident that occurred on that date. It's going to be, you know, a lot of underlying factors, a lot of other underlying incidents and things to consider. But it all starts with having that initial reporting and making that documentation.
And I would say as far as the state actor here, I'm a state prosecutor. I'm so grateful for our federal partners because they have a lot more tools in their tool chest under the Civil Rights Act. So the state actors, the prosecutors, our tools are rather limited. We have a misdemeanor statute on ethnic intimidation, and then we have an aggravating factor for felony sentences. And what that means is if we can prove to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that the act was committed as part of bias, then we can sentence, the judge can sentence that person to a higher level than they would normally do so. So that's kind of limited, but what that means for us is that we get the information from law enforcement, we synthesize that information. Sometimes we ask for them to go back and find something else, like maybe look in this person's background. What kind of history did they have? Are there other instances where they have exhibited signs of bias or hate towards a protected class? So sometimes we do that. And if we have sufficient evidence, then we can submit that as a factor to the jury. But also we can include our federal partners and say, hey, you know, this doesn't exactly fit under our state statutes. What can you do as a federal partner to address the harm that has been done by this particular person, which is why I love our civil rights section, and so glad to see you here. But is anybody in here remember the case of Stephen Addison? Stephen Addison was a motorcycle rider and a veteran. I have a nod here. Who was a Fort Liberty veteran. He was driving down Skyby Road and was shot and killed. Anybody remember that? Anybody drive by the memorial at the Enterprise rental car? Yep. Anybody in here think that that was obviously a hate crime when they first heard it? Yes. All right. Well, we tried him for first-degree murder, and the punishment in North Carolina for first-degree murder is what? Life without parole. So in that instance, even if we had proved that it was a hate crime, it would not have made any difference as far as the punishment for that particular offender. So in that situation, although many folks on the outside looking in felt that appeared to be, you know, looks like a duck, walks like a duck, swims like a duck, right? But we actually, when we proved it to the jury, we really didn't have sufficient evidence to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. But it still turned out well for Mr. Addison's family. They got the justice they deserved, which was life without parole. And guess how long the jury was out? 1 hour. Thank you, Cumberland County. You were there. Do you want me to?
Yes, sure.
Okay, well, I know that we'll probably talk about reporting to the FBI on more than one occasion during this hour. But I would just add to what the other panelists said, I would ask that you double tap. So please do call 911 if it's something, if it's an emergency. If you've witnessed a hate crime or you've been the victim of a hate crime, absolutely report it to your local law enforcement, but also please double tap and report it to the FBI. There's a common misconception that there's some sort of magical mechanism that routes all local reporting that should go to the FBI automatically, and that just doesn't exist. We try to get ahead of it and have really strong bonds with our local law enforcement partners so that they know who they can call if something that looks like it could be a hate crime is reported to our local law enforcement partners. But we also ask that the community, you think of us if you see something that looks like it could be a hate crime. So as Kaylee mentioned, in North Carolina, there is no state statute specifically for a hate crime. All we have in this state is the federal statute or the misdemeanor or the aggravating, the statute that bumps it up to a felony. Those are not bad tools, but I can tell you the federal hammer is a lot heavier. So if we can, it is a very difficult threshold to meet to prove that something was a hate crime because, like the chief said, it's not just the crime. There's a lot more investigation that goes into it to understand the person's mindset, what may have been motivating them, if they do indeed have bias. So it is a high threshold to meet, as it should be, but we will absolutely run down every possible thread to make sure pull on every thread, run down every rabbit hole, and make sure that we do our due diligence for any hate crime allegation that you bring to us, and we will work closely with our local law enforcement partners. But I would just foot stomp, please report to the FBI in addition to reporting to local law enforcement.
And I would add this. We have the benefit in the city of Fayetteville. We have nearly a dozen TFOs, that are task force officers that work directly with the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, and we get options. As we choose or to charge for a crime, we make those decisions and we pitch pretty much to both federal and state, and then we cooperate to who has the better case and would get the better turnout for the victims of those crimes. So, we do operate and have that benefit that a lot of smaller agencies don't, of having that relationship already and people working with our federal agencies on a day in and day out basis.
Yeah, I think I'll just add that I think Fayetteville is unique in that this partnership seems to be a lot tighter than it is elsewhere in the state. So that wasn't a specific to a Fayetteville little flag that I was raising. I just say, it just in general, we would love it if the public would double tap and report it to us too. But we're really grateful for great partners like Fayetteville PD.
And I could add that when the cases are reported to the FBI or any federal agency, our U.S. attorney and our panel of attorneys are drawn in immediately, and they work together with the FBI as they're vetting these cases for prosecution, so that there are lots of eyes that are looking at these cases. All of the angles are being explored. So the theme that we want you to take away today is report, report, report. Even if you think it may not be, just report it and let the experts look at it to see if it is a hate crime and to see what can be done about the incident. So what kinds of information should a person provide to the police, the FBI, when reporting a hate crime or a bias incident?
Like I said at the beginning, the most important thing is that initial report. We want, to be as true and factual basis as possible so that those determining factors can be set in place. And that initial report, while things are fresh on your mind, and to get those details added to that report. Any follow-up reporting, if there's something you remember second, third day, a week later, if there's any witnesses that come and approach you and say, hey, I saw what happened the other day, make sure that you refer them so their information statements can be added to our reports. So again, the greatest asset we have is documentation, and even if this instance or that one specific instance doesn't meet the level of a hate crime, that documentation starts a recording of a person's behaviors, their prejudices, their biases, that may lead to a potential prosecution in the future. So again, be as accurate and thorough as you can in reporting those initial reports.
Anybody else?
I think that was an excellent, I have almost nothing to add. I would just, again, foot stomp. The details in hate crime allegations are especially important. Details are always important in any crime, but things that might seem irrelevant or seem like something that you wouldn't normally focus on in any other type of crime, like what the person was wearing. Did you see any swastikas? Did they make any gestures? Did they use any racial slurs? Anything, basically the substance, the nitty gritty of what gives you the sense that this was not just another robbery or another assault. This was motivated by something. So just the more details that can be provided, the more contacts of witnesses, anybody that saw what happened, heard what happened, has video of what happened, all of that up front will allow us to hit the ground running instead of having to go back and search for it all on our own, like person by person.
So I hear you saying that you want to report what they say, the words. You want to report what they did. You want to report any known associations that may give you an idea that there is bias or prejudice involved. You want to do that. Any kind of documentation that you can provide, you want to report that, because the more information they have up front, the more it can be unraveled, because sometimes a hate crime doesn't look like a hate crime, right? It may look like something else. Just report it and gather this information, especially if you're just a bystander. Gather it and help the community, not just the individual, but it is a community. Hate crimes is a community crime. It is not just about the victim. It is a community crime.
And I think it's important that we all understand the assignment, right?
Yes.
Not just the folks sitting up here on this panel, but everybody in the community needs to understand the assignment, which is you need to identify and report and just be there for us when we need you, which means if you're a witness to a case, be there for us. And just like in Mr. Addison's case, I can't tell you how many community folks came forward to help us with Mr. Addison's case. It was unbelievable. They followed that case from the beginning to the end, and they still meet at that at the community memorial. So that's understanding the assignment, is that we can't do it. We can't do it by ourselves. You've got to be there with us. And like Jennifer was saying, is sometimes you don't necessarily understand at first blush that it might, in fact, be a bias or a hate crime. And I was talking about this when we were doing some briefing for the panel, is that I had a case where a man ran into the back of another person's car, got out, and started beating the crap, excuse my language, out of the person that they had just hit, and using slurs towards that person. And so we're thinking, well, he said, well, that person cut me off, and I just reacted, in an inappropriate manner. I was like, okay, let's pull your driving history. Guess what we found when we pulled that driving history? He had a history of hitting other cars and then engaging in physical altercations with the drivers. So that's something as minor as a traffic incident where there is racial words used. And so in that case, we got to use that tiny hammer in state crime, which is ethnic intimidation, and charge him with that, which is a misdemeanor. But still, understand the assignment, report, but you also have to have quality investigation by law enforcement. You have to have prosecutors are willing to take the time to look behind what's on the face of it, so to speak. So we're lucky in Cumberland County to have Mr. Billy West, who gives us the time to look behind these things and bring them to you as a community because you understand the assignment.
Mm-hmm. And so let's flesh that out a little more. My next question is, does hate or bias have to be the only factor or the main factor for it to be a hate incident or a hate crime?
So I'm going to borrow a metaphor that was used by a DOJ trial attorney who was on the case for a trial I just had in January. It was a hate crime trial out of Charlotte. The way that he described it to the jury was the bias does not have to be the primary, the only, or even the primary reason for motivating factor behind the crime. It just has to have been a factor. And the way that he described that was, if a team wins a baseball game, you may think they had like a star pitcher and that's why they won. The other team didn't get any points, so it's the pitcher, right? But it didn't rain that day. The catcher didn't twist his ankle during the game. There's a whole laundry list of reasons why a team can win a game, right? So similarly, if a person's bias plays a role in why they chose to do what they did to the person to whom they did it, then it is potentially within the realm of what would be considered a hate crime. It does not have to be the primary or the sole factor, but it definitely has to be an important factor, which is why the onus is on us to reach the threshold for proving the person's bias and their mindset at the time.
And that's really important because people can become numb to certain words because they've heard it so much. And even a victim may dismiss certain things that are said during a crime and think of it as not the crux or the main issue when the crime is being committed. It is really important to understand that it doesn't have to be the only factor. It could be just a part of. And that's why reporting is important, because we need to understand words matter. And if you hear words that signal that it's part of, report. Chief?
I would say the only thing that I'd really add is, when we talked about the definition, is motivated by. And the example that I would give is, we all have our friends out there. If they asked us for help, we'd probably go that extra yard, okay? Because of the motivation of, that is my friend. What is motivating me to work harder for that individual? What is motivating me to work less harder, for a stranger? Because I don't have those motivating factors there. So if we apply, what was the motivation of this individual, and I think you said, but not for, I think that is the key example there. People get in fights all the time, but if there's a racial motivation to that, you'll see people take stuff a step further. I think that's what you're looking for in your prosecution. Did they take a step further because of this motivating factor? And I think that's what law enforcement, we generally look for, because charging someone with a hate crime is a serious offense. And we have to look at those things, and those are the things that we're looking for. And that's why it's so key, the previous questions about reporting. And when we investigate, it's key for us to go back in time and take a look at what other things what could have been motivating or a factor within the crime we're investigating right now. Criminal histories play a big part in everyday investigations, as far as, and for prosecutions as well. They make their determining factors based on a subject's prior history. So again, I just think, it has to play the role within that crime itself by merely the definition we gave at the start of the program.
And I think one of a good example of that is armed robbery. So armed robbery has a goal, which is to take something that does not belong to you and convert it to your own use, right? So that's an obvious motivation for an armed robbery. It does require use of some sort of deadly weapon. But what if that armed robbery is targeted towards a specific class of protected folks? Might that also be a hate crime? It can. And certainly there's some history here in North Carolina. I think the chief had told me about a series of robberies of owners of, was it Asian restaurants? I think is what you told me. And so, and I know that's happened in Durham. But basically what they were doing is targeting folks who tended to carry a lot of cash. So that could have been a motivation. But could it also been a motivation that they were targeting these restaurant owners because of their ethnic origin? Certainly. But you have to investigate all of that information. And when they do, they can see these strong similarities between all of these armed robberies. So, and then we make a decision, you know, with the help of the federal partners, does this rise to the level of potentially a civil rights violation so it could be prosecuted on the state level for armed robbery, which is a pretty serious crime, but potentially on the Fed side through the civil process.
Okay, my next question is, are there other ways that a defendant or perpetrator can be held responsible if the incident does not rise or qualify as a federal hate crime? Samantha?
Oh, absolutely. Almost in any given, hate crime allegation case, there will be other crimes committed. And sometimes, that's a tool that we use a lot. So let's just, for example, there was a man outside of Charlotte who was calling synagogues, threatening to bomb the synagogues and blow up the synagogues. And the U.S. Attorney's Office there decided, because of this man's history and because there were some mental health issues there too, they ultimately decided not to charge him with 245, Title 18, Section 245, which would be communicating threats, threatening to use force or violence against a person or a place because of their national or their protected class, or 247, which is specifically related to religious properties. Instead, they charged him with Section 875, which is communication of threats. That is a much easier federal crime to prove, but it also carries a hefty sentence with it. So we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. So please don't be discouraged if you're working with us as investigators or the state side, and we just don't see an avenue for meeting the threshold for proving the hate crime. That does not mean all is lost, because unfortunately, when these things happen, a lot of different crimes or violations are committed. So whether that's on the federal level or the state level, like the chief said, we have the ability to ensure that justice is brought, regardless of whether it neatly meets the federal statute for hate crimes. And I would say, generally, and I've been explained this by the attorneys who are much smarter about the law than I am, the law is designed to punish the crime. It's not specific to the statute, so the sentence should be roughly the same depending on the level of the crime. So don't be discouraged. But when we can, we do want, obviously, we want to prove that the hate crime was committed, because, like has been said multiple times today, the crime is not just committed against an individual, it's felt by the whole community. And we believe strongly that the community, for there to be justice for the family of the victims, the community as a whole, we want to be able to prove that what happened was indeed a hate crime if it was indeed motivated by bias.
So Kelly, you mentioned this before, but it's probably worth mentioning it again, some of the state statutes that you can use.
Right. When Sam was talking, I was thinking communicating a threat. And Chief knows this, but communicating a threat in North Carolina is a Class 1 misdemeanor, punishable by a maximum of 120 days in jail. And then we have our federal partners who have so many great tools. I was writing down the statute numbers because I'm not a federal prosecutor, never have been, but I was like, ooh, these are interesting. Because clearly there's a lot more that they can do with terroristic threats than we can do. And there's a reason for that, is because terroristic threats threaten not just the community, but the entire nation, right? So it makes sense that the feds are going to handle cases involving terroristic threats, such as towards the synagogues, like she was talking about. And the statutes in North Carolina are the ethnic intimidation, which is a misdemeanor, like I said, and aggravating factor statute, and that's pretty much it for us. So when we see bad people doing bad things, we're limited to using the state crime statutes, but sometimes that's a pretty big hammer. Because we do have life in prison without parole for first-degree murder or a homicide committed in perpetration of a felony. So if someone commits an armed robbery, whether it's based on intimidation or a hate crime, and somebody dies, that's a felony murder, and that's life without parole. So we do have tools, but just not as many tools as perhaps our federal partners.
And I would just remind everybody, it always starts with the crime. We're going to prosecute that original crime, regardless whether we can prove the hate crime or not.
Sure.
So I think when you ask, are there other ways that it can be held responsible, it starts with that crime. A good prosecution of that originating crime, even though we don't meet the levels to prove that it was a hate crime, or there was that ethnic intimidation, or whether, they violated someone's civil rights, it always goes back to that original crime to ensure we get that prosecution there, at least that conviction, to start that history of a process for further consideration in the future.
And I meant to jump in when we were talking about identifying signs or symbols. You need to educate yourself on the various signs or symbols of race or bias because they change over time. A lot of this super far right folks have adopted certain symbols that you and I, who are, normal folks going about our lives, may not understand. That particular symbols or flags might be a clue that this person has some specific thoughts and feelings about race, gender, religion. And if you don't make a note of that, if you're in that fender bender, or if you have witnessed somebody being shot on Skybow Road and you observe the stickers and flags that are on that truck, we may not know that. So even if you don't really understand what that symbol is, make a note of it. There is a weird sort of yellow flag. I don't know what it is.
Take a picture.
Take a picture.
Yeah.
Everybody has one of these, right? They can be our best friends in investigation.
If you guys are interested in kind of getting smart on some of the new symbols, numbers, combinations of things that to like everyday, like normal people, if that's such a thing,
Like
wouldn't
and
recognize.
tattoos too.
Sure.
Right.
So if the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, has online, I forget the exact name of it, but it's basically an index. It's like a dictionary sort of all that they update as new information comes out about what does 8-8 mean? Well, 8-8 is often used by white supremacists because H is the 8th letter of the alphabet and HH means Heil Hitler. Who knew? I feel like that one's a little bit older, but there are new, symbols and things of that nature coming out all the time that are used sort of as code amongst people who carry biases and are like-minded. So if you're interested, you can just Google the ADL. I think it's hate speech index or something of that nature. So if you're interested, it's out there.
Yeah.
It can be a rabbit hole, so prepare yourself. There's some rough stuff on there.
This is probably a time where I should mention that there are civil rights statutes that can be used also. The federal government has in their toolbox, there are certain things civilly that can be done in terms of injunctions, fines, these types of things. So again, we want to stress reporting. Because even if, when you're talking about sex discrimination, housing discrimination, these kinds of things, there are lots of tools that can be used really to deal with things that you may not know or may not think of. We have the tools. So again. All right, let's go to the next question, and that is centered on investigation. How is the investigation different when it's been determined to be a hate crime versus one where it's not a hate crime?
I think proving a hate crime is a natural conclusion to a case, not something that we need to start with trying to prove from the very onset. I think as we teach our officers and what we tell them is, let the investigation go where it may. It leads where it leads. You know, sometimes when we have a predisposition in our mind of what something is, we introduce bias into that investigation. For me, the most natural way for it to occur is we follow up on all leads, and the investigation leads us where the investigation leads us. But we got to be thorough in that investigation. We have to do the follow-ups to prove or disprove something. But like anything else in the world, if you start something with a goal in mind of this is what I want to prove, you're introducing some of your own bias into that investigation. So I would say that it's best for, and that's why we present cases to prosecutors, so they can say, well, did you take this into consideration, or did you follow up on these things? But again, I think for me, as you know, a police chief, I want my detectives to investigate crimes to their natural end, not go in with a predetermined outcome for where they want that case to end.
I mean, that's an absolutely fair point. I think any good investigator would agree with that statement. I would say that with hate crimes, if there's a strong allegation that there was a bias involved, or if we have, through the investigation, we develop probable cause that it appears that there was a bias motivation involved, the investigation becomes a lot, just in my experience, it becomes a lot more far-reaching than sort of a traditional investigation of a traditional crime, I guess, if you could put it in those words. And the reason is because to prove that a bias was a motivation in a crime, we have to understand the person. So we have to get to know this person. It's not just about the crime they committed on, the 22nd of August. It's about who are they leading up to that point. Did they show, I have to look at their social media. I have to interview everybody that knows them to understand who this person is and understand if there really was a bias or not. And it's not to prove necessarily that there was a bias motivating factor, but it's to prove whether there was one. So it cuts both ways. There may be an allegation that this person is a racist, but through thorough investigation, I just don't have the evidence to support that, or vice versa. If somebody, it feels that they were targeted because of their race, and I look into this person's history, and they have a history of posting a lot of ugly language about a certain protected class on social media, or they happen to only be in car accidents targeting Hispanic people and use racial slurs while attacking them, or things of that nature. Those are things that require a lot more extensive investigation to really flesh out and understand than, I hate to say a traditional crime because I'm not sure that there really is one. But, any good investigation is going to be thorough, but with hate crime investigation specifically, it requires a lot of extra steps to really understand who this person is and what was motivating them.
And as prosecutors, we're used to having to prove to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt the state of mind of the person who committed the offense. What was their specific intent at the time they committed the offense? So this is nothing new or different that we're having to relearn. We know how to do this. When you're trying to prove that someone intended to kill somebody, they rarely announce it in open court in front of the jury. I intended to kill that person. We have to prove that by the circumstances surrounding the event that this person and the crime that this person committed. So we're used to doing that. And as long as, again, we understand the assignment and you make note of all of the things that could help us show that specific intent, and in other words, that they committed this offense because of bias, then we can present that to the jury as an aggravating factor. So there's nothing new or magical about it, but it does require a little bit more work, but we can do it.
What if the victim is concerned for their safety and is hesitant to report it? As we know, hate crimes has that ability to instill fear, intimidation into a victim. What if the victim is concerned and said, I'm hesitant to report this because I don't feel safe?
That's a real problem. So hate crimes, I don't have the most updated numbers at the forefront of my mind, but hate crimes are one of the most underreported crimes nationwide, especially in North Carolina. So the FBI collects data through surveys on an annual basis and puts it out. I know it's on DOJ's website. If I had a PowerPoint, I'd pull up a chart so you guys could see. But hate crimes are on the rise. Reporting is not keeping up with the rise in the number of hate crimes that are occurring across the country and in our state. And I just from, anecdotally from conversations with members of the public and victims, I'm finding that this is a big reason. People are afraid. They fear for their safety. They fear for their family's safety. They don't want to bring attention to themselves. Maybe they don't think anything is going to be done. So I want to acknowledge that this is a really good question and it is a real problem. So the FBI is not in the business of providing any sort of witness protection or victim protection. So there's nothing that, I cannot post outside of your door and make sure that you're protected. However, at the local level we do, and this is maybe something better for the chief to talk about, we do have things in place for people who fear for their safety, and steps that you can take by going to your magistrate's office and taking out a no contact order, for example, or calling 911 if you feel immediately threatened. Somebody's outside of your home, for whatever reason you feel threatened. That's more of a local matter. Chief, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I do think you can speak to it better than I can.
So no, there's options. Again, as the chief of police and the head of an agency, that I can't form special relationships and promise anybody that I can offer them protection. But we do work with plenty of organizations within our community that are willing and able to step up and be advocates for victims in circumstances. And I'll give a perfect example. Over the past year, we've been working heavily with the Phoenix Center as it relates to domestic violence and sexual assaults. They have resources that the police department doesn't have or can't provide. But as a chief, it's my job to go out and identify those resources within our community. In addition to that, we have advocates for our victims. One of our victim advocates is in the room today. They can talk to them about their options. They can talk to them about, what they could do to potentially be safer. They can put them in contact with those outside entities and organizations that can provide them with something further that I, as the chief of police and the police department, can't provide. So I think that's key for any organization to have partnerships throughout their community, throughout their network, that can step in and fill the gaps and voids that your specific agency or entity can't fill. And we've worked hard at the Fayetteville Police Department to build a lot of those relationships.
And for the district attorney's office, whenever we're working with victims of any crime, we have methods that we use to make them feel comfortable and safe. For example, we have a private waiting room for them outside of the public view. We have victim witness legal assistants that escort them to and from the courtroom, so that helps them feel comfortable. If English is not their best language, we have a language line that we can use to help translate. If they have economic issues that may be weighing on their ability to come to court, that's when we can work with our community partners to try to help to ameliorate some of those financial issues. But I'm not going to lie to you, it takes real bravery to report something, to report a crime that's been committed against you. It requires real bravery. And for those of you who've worked with victims of domestic violence or sexual violence, like I have, I worked with kids for about 25 years. And sometimes I would say to adults, your child is one of the bravest people I have ever met. If only some of the adults in my community could be that brave when something happens in their community that's committed by somebody that they may know, and report that. That takes real bravery. And it's a real handicap for prosecutions when people, first of all, they're going to have barriers. They might have economic barriers, language barriers, cultural barriers to reporting. But then they also may have that barrier of, this is too scary for me. I just can't. But you know what? Until we as a community start channeling the bravery of our kids, it's never going to change. we're still going to be out there being victimized by crime, whether it's bias-related, hate-related, or just for old-fashioned money. So I can't sugarcoat it. It's scary. It's scary. But, you know, having done it for, oh my gosh, 28 years now, I will say it's worth it. It's worth it.
And I would add to that education really is the key to help people to understand that the system is there for them. In 2021, the Attorney General initiated a program called United Against Hate, where all 94 U.S. attorney offices across the country now go out and educate the communities about hate crimes, what they are, what we are doing. Civil rights teams were stood up across the country, and a forum like this is really important to combat some of the fear and intimidation that is leveraged in communities on hate crimes. We have to educate people. People have to know that these crimes are serious and that we are here for them. So when you leave here today and you go out to your community, in whatever way you can, tell folks that hate crimes are being taken seriously, and that's what we've been doing. We hold forums like these all across the Eastern District. We're continuing to do that, and the goal is to educate our communities. We had one in Raleigh, I think in 2021 or 2022, and what we did was to invite some of the victims to speak to the community so that they can see what a victim of hate crime, tell them about their experiences. These were successful prosecutions, and so the victims were, they got their voices back, and they got to see those people talk about the power that came from speaking out. So it is so, so important. And I think we have perhaps time for one more question. And so I'll make this a double question. Number one, is the FBI always involved when it is a hate crime? And after that, tell me how the FBI and local law enforcement, you talked about this a little bit, but talk about how you all come together and work towards getting a just solution for a victim of hate crimes.
So
I think, if you allow me to start, and then
Sure.
we'll show how the ball rolls, okay? So we talked about that initial report. We have to be accurate, detailed in everything that we do. FBI is not coming to Fayetteville to take a report for an initial call for service. It starts with that first 911 call where the Fayetteville Police Department shows up and starts that ball rolling, unless you go directly with the FBI and say, hey, there's a hate crime. But they're probably going to kick it back to us and say, hey, we need a report on these things. So the first thing is that 911 call, getting the police officer, getting your report done. From my jurisdiction, like I said earlier, we have about 12 TFOs that sit in various positions across our police department. You know, as we consider, the detectives go through and they prove a case, and then they do the research of, is this possibly related to a hate crime or a hate incident? You know, then we look at those factors, and then we start to, it's like buying a car. You're looking for the best interest rate, right? We're looking for who gives us the best deal. Okay, we'll make our pitches to the local DA's office. We'll make our pitches to our TFO, our federal partners, you know, and sometimes they'll have to cut a deal amongst themselves. But, you know, I think it starts, again, like we started the conversation with that initial report, and then make it a determining factor of who has the best potential for a prosecution or outcome for the case for the victims at hand.
So in response to the first question, is the FBI always involved? I would say ideally, because the FBI, this is thoroughly within our jurisdiction to investigate civil rights violations and specifically hate crimes, as we've been talking about today. So I would hope that the FBI would always be involved, but we rely on our local law enforcement partners and you, the community, to bring us in the loop. So I would say a lot of civil rights investigations do start with that 911 call and do start with local law enforcement, but not all of them do. Some come directly to us, and maybe it wasn't an emergency, but it was something that somebody noticed, or they reported to local law enforcement, but didn't occur to them until later that maybe it was a hate crime. So regardless of how it starts, ideally the FBI knows is involved, because we absolutely want to be involved in any investigation involving a potential hate crime violation. And then yes, so we, as the chief said, we work in lockstep with our local law enforcement partners. We just become a bigger team, and there are some aspects of hate crimes that are better investigated by the local law enforcement agency involved, and some that are better investigated by the FBI, because we have that federal statute under which we're operating. So I mentioned earlier, hate crime investigations are sprawling. So it's not just understanding the actual incident, but it's understanding who the person is. So our local law enforcement partners are great at handling the actual incident. What happened, identifying, was there any surveillance footage that captured this? Doing a canvas, did anybody else see this? That type of investigation that they specialize in, and then we can supplement that with the broader, okay, let's understand who this person is. If we have allegations that, X, Y, or Z, bias was a motivation in this factor, we develop that piece of it. And so together we work to understand the full 360-degree picture of, what happened and why. And then, like the chief said, and like Kaylee said, we figure it out between really the prosecutors. I collect all the facts and then give it to the attorneys, and then you guys tell me if we have a hate crime violation or not.
And then we have just a polite discussion, right? About who can best seek justice in that particular case, right? Sometimes, I want it because I want my community to see, what happens. And sometimes when it goes federal, the community sort of loses sight of that. There's not as much for us in the community, much transparency with the federal system. You guys know where the courthouse is, you know how to get there, you can court watch, you can do all of that. Maybe the federal system is a little more opaque to you. So sometimes there might be a little tussle there, but we're all pulling in the same direction because we understand the assignment, which is to get the justice for the folks that have been harmed, which sometimes is an individual, sometimes it's a community. I'm sort of a blunt instrument as a state prosecutor, but you guys have so many more civil and criminal tools, so it's great to have them. They're like the wind at our back.
The last thing I really want to make sure we mention is, how do you report something to the FBI? There are a couple of ways. So if you forget everything I say today, just remember Google report to the FBI and it'll come up. Yes. So we have an online system. If you forget, no problem, just Google it, but it's tips.fbi.gov, tips.fbi.gov. Yeah. So you can report online. That's a really easy way to do it. You can also call, I think it's 1-800-CALL-FBI, and talk to an actual person if you prefer to do it that way. But that is definitely the preferred way of reporting to the FBI, because reporting in that manner, whether it's online or via telephone, routes it to our National Threat Operations Center, which is based in Northern Virginia, and then they work 24/7 and take reports, anytime, any day. And then they do some initial background work for us, the investigators, in the area of responsibility where it's going to be rooted, so that when I receive the complaint, I already have some basic information about who is involved, their criminal history, their Department of Motor Vehicle information, some really basic things that allows me to just hit the ground running a lot faster than if I had to go back and kind of rework that all myself. So remember, 2 ways: tips.fbi.gov and call 1-800-CALL-FBI. And just remember to provide as much detail as you can. One other thing I wanted to bring up, a lot of people, especially victims of hate crimes, want to report things anonymously. If it's a choice between not reporting and reporting anonymously, please report it anonymously. But understand that it severely hampers me as an investigator in really doing much about the allegation if something is reported anonymously. I wanted to circle really briefly back to, some victims are afraid, right? And we talked about what the locals can do for your like physical immediate safety, but then I, as the investigator, when I write up any of my affidavits, anything that could be unsealed in the future, I do the best I can to protect the identities of my victims. So I never use names, full names. I always use initials. We can't promise complete anonymity forever, but we take every step we can to protect the identities of our victims so that your name isn't splashed out there on the news. If it's on the news, it's going to be, my affidavits are not going to identify you. And I know that my colleagues work the same way. So we take every step we can to provide you as much anonymity as possible and be as sensitive to your concerns about your safety as we can. And we'll work with you and our local law enforcement partners to make sure that you feel as supported as you possibly can by law enforcement.
And you can always call the U.S. Attorney's Office and we'll get you to the right people. I want to thank the panelists, Chief Braden, Kaylee from the District Attorney's Office, and Samantha from the FBI. And thank you all for listening and coming here today.
Thank you, panel. And they'll be around for a little bit. If you have questions of them, you want to probably reach out to them and talk with them individually. It is now 10:22, and we would like to have a break. Our next panel is the resources panel, and the moderator for the panel is Mr. Angelo Mathey, Commissioner of the North Carolina Human Relations Commission out of Raleigh, North Carolina. Then we have as the panelists, Richard Bolden, Staff Attorney, North Carolina Human Relations Commission, Raleigh, North Carolina. Betsy Rader, District Director, U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, District Office out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And then we have Kelly Clark, who's one of the co-directors for Legal Aid of North Carolina, Inc., the Fair Housing Project, located in Durham, North Carolina. If you would, give a good hand to these people.
All right, folks. Good morning again, and welcome to the Hate Crimes Forum Resources Panel. Today, during this panel, we are going to be discussing the crucial resources available for victims of bias-based incidents and hate crimes. And my goal today, as the moderator, is to highlight some of the resources that are available within the entities that these individuals represent. And so, before I begin, I just wanted to ask our panelists again to just introduce themselves briefly and the work that they do within their agencies that they represent. So I'll turn to my left.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Clark. I am a co-director of the Fair Housing Project within Legal Aid. I've been a legal aid attorney for close to 23 years now. Moved over to the Fair Housing Project, where all we do is housing discrimination, education, and enforcement since 2011.
I'm Richard Bolden. I'm the agency counsel to the North Carolina Human Relations Commission. I have been with the commission for 20 years now. I've been an attorney for 35 years now. And we enforce the North Carolina Fair Housing Act, as well as some other civil rights acts that North Carolina has.
Hi, and I'm Betsy Rader. I'm the district director for the Charlotte District of the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The Charlotte District, despite the name Charlotte, actually covers almost all of Virginia, all of North Carolina, and most of South Carolina. We have 6 offices in this district, and those are in Norfolk and Richmond, Virginia. We have 3 offices in North Carolina, in Greensboro, Raleigh, and Charlotte. And then in South Carolina, we have an office in Greenville. We are open to the public for walk-ins. On certain days of the week and certain times, you should always check our website. But really the best way to report discrimination is through our online portal with the EEOC because, you know, as always, you know, we're not heavily staffed for the amount of work that we have. So it's good if people can report violations through the portal. We enforce in the workplace, the civil rights laws in this country. So we enforce, for instance, Title VII, which prohibits discrimination based on race, sex, gender, color, religion, national origin. We enforce the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. We enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act. We enforce the Genetic Information Discrimination laws. We enforce the Equal Pay Act. And we have a new law that we want to make sure everybody knows about, which is the pregnancy discrimination law. And that just got passed last summer. So those are all the things that fall within the jurisdiction of my 6 offices.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you, Kelly and Richard. I think the first question, and we're going to break down all the resources that these agencies have. My first question to Kelly and then to Richard and Betsy is just talk briefly about the resources available within your agency for victims of bias-based incidents or hate crimes. And we'll start with you, Kelly.
Sure. So at Legal Aid, we have 23 local offices, and then we have a variety of statewide projects, one being the Fair Housing Project. And listening to the first panel, who were wonderful, made me think of this one case that I have worked on that involved a hate crime, but it involved nearly, I think, all the agencies in this room or like agencies in this room. So, for instance, in a case involving a hate crime based on and race harassment, it first came into our office where the clients were looking for a civil protective order. So the no contact orders based on 50C of our North Carolina general statutes. That's how it came in. But with more investigation, we saw that it was also a housing discrimination case that my project would work on with the local office. As well as there was also pending state criminal charges. You heard the charge about ethnic intimidation and so forth. That was one of the charges that was brought in addition to communicating threats and stalking. So we had state criminal, state civil protective order, then the Fair Housing Act, which we filed with HUD, an administrative complaint, transferred over to the North Carolina Human Relations Commission. And then when there was evidence of force or threat of force, then it got referred to the United States Department of Justice. We had found other victims in our investigation through, and I wrote this down, Chief Braden, your quote, "The greatest asset we have is documentation," which was huge in that case because we found other victim survivors through the incident reports, through the law enforcement, as well as going to the courthouse and looking up other crimes that this harasser had done. This was a harasser, a white man, that was terrorizing our clients who were an elderly Black American couple just up the road in Pitt County. And so the case came in, it was like talking about what resources our local office, at first going in for the civil no contact order. And then it morphed out of that where we actually then brought, in addition to the HUD complaint, we brought a federal civil case where the case eventually settled for $500,000 as well as injunctive relief. And the United States Department of Justice also, it first was opened up in their civil division, but they referred it to their criminal, and that's where the hate crime was prosecuted when we, particularly with one of the other victims that we had found, that was outside the statute of limitations that they could bring their own case. United States Department of Justice, which they'll probably talk about, or this will be more, they can go back longer than a private individual. That's what I'm usually stuck with, is for the time period when a private individual can bring a case, which is usually 2 years. So our office does the civil protective orders. It also represents people in housing discrimination, which is generally my project, what we get involved in. And then if we get certain permission, we can also represent in the criminal proceeding if they are, like my clients, they were witnesses in that. So we were able to represent in that forum as well.
Richard?
The Human Relations Commission, of which Jean Troy is the program manager, has a number of things that it can do in various discriminatory situations. By far the biggest thing that we do is investigate claims of housing discrimination. The North Carolina Fair Housing Act has been deemed substantially equivalent by HUD to the U.S. Fair Housing Act. Our agency has been designated equivalent to HUD doing an investigation. So most of what we do is we take in complaints about fair housing. Fair housing does not mean that your landlord has to be fair to you. Fair housing means that he cannot be unfair to you based on your membership in certain protected classes, being race, color, religion, national origin, handicapping condition, gender, and families with children. So those are the types of fair housing cases we look into. If we are talking about hate crimes, we do get into that some with fair housing because there is a provision of the State Fair Housing Act and the Federal Fair Housing Act. In the federal, it's Section 818, which is how we usually refer to it, and that is when harassment and intimidation in housing. So if somebody burns a cross on their neighbor's lawn, that's an 818 violation. If they threaten them, if they create a very hostile environment because, frankly, racists are smarter than they were 50 years ago. When the Fair Housing Act was passed, you could walk up to a landlord and say, why didn't you rent to this person? And they'd say, well, he's black. Well, they don't do that anymore. Well, occasionally they do, but, and then we have an easy time. But in terms of harassment and intimidation, we are looking at pervasive patterns between someone who is a housing provider, and that can include, that's not just a renter, a landlord. A housing provider can be your homeowners association that you must belong to live in that neighborhood. It can be the Realtors Association. It can be a lot of things, anything to do with housing that's based on one of the protected classes. Now at the moment, and for some years past, more than half of our cases are based on disability discrimination. Usually reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications. However, even in some of those cases, which seem fairly straightforward, you can get harassment and intimidation going on. We have seen people being harassed by their neighbors because they put in a wheelchair ramp. A very nice wheelchair ramp. And you might think, how would anybody object to this? But they did. And among other things, we brought suit against them for harassment and intimidation. In terms of conspiracy to commit harassment and intimidation based on race, that comes under North Carolina General Statutes 99D. 99D is subtitled Interference with Civil Rights, and it basically makes it a civil offense in North Carolina for people to conspire against other people's civil rights motivated by race, religion, ethnicity, or gender. It does not cover the same number that the federal laws on housing and, say, employment do. It is only those four, and it is only conspiracies. One individual cannot, by themselves, violate Chapter 99D. However, if they do conspire with another person, then, and there is enough evidence for someone to come to us, we can look into it, and if it is backed up, we can file a civil lawsuit under 99D. We can get injunctive relief, we can get damages, pretty much the whole civil range of penalties. Does everybody understand the difference between civil law and criminal law? Criminal law is you broke this law and you may go to jail. Civil law is you broke this law and you may have to pay money, essentially. So our agency brings civil cases in the superior courts of North Carolina and sometimes in the federal courts. There's also a carve-out in 99D that it does not apply against a governmental unit, a government official with respect to actions taken within the scope of his government official duties, or an employer or his agent with respect to actions taken concerning his employees within the scope of the employment relationship. Okay. That's a big carve-out. It means we can't do anything about employment discrimination under this statute. It also makes it difficult, though not impossible, for us to move against a municipality or county under this statute. We can do it. We have done it successfully by pleading that the discrimination was outside the jurisdiction of their normal government functions. That is, that once they started breaking the law, they were no longer in their official government duties. But those are the two statutes that we have to fight discrimination in this state. That's what we have.
Thank you, Richard. Betsy?
So in terms of discrimination that takes place in the workplace, like his agency, we're a civil enforcement agency. So I have a team of attorneys who can ultimately, after a process that I'll describe here in a minute, can ultimately go to court, federal court, and prosecute civilly employment discrimination claims under all the bases I talked about earlier. How you get to that point is you start by coming to us and doing something called an inquiry. And that's what I described, where ideally you go to our online portal, and like everybody was saying in the first panel, it's really helpful if instead of just saying my employer discriminated against me or I was harassed, it's very helpful if you can give facts. I was harassed because my supervisor said that unless I went out for drinks with him, I was not going to have a job anymore. I was discriminated against, because I was more qualified for the job, and they chose a person of a different race, and they made comments that they didn't like people of my race. And so, any sorts of facts and, of course, documents are really helpful when you file that inquiry. You don't have to. It's just helpful. And then what happens after that is that we will then have an interview with you if you're not represented by counsel. If you have an attorney, there's an online portal that the attorney can use to just file your civil rights charge. But our system's really set up for people who don't have an attorney. And so, we make it very layperson friendly. And so then we have investigators, and they would interview you And they would elicit all the facts and talk to you about the different types of civil rights charges that you might have. Maybe you've been discriminated against and harassed and retaliated against. All of those things can be illegal under our laws. So they'll make sure that you've included everything you should in your charge. Then that charge is filed, and this is all a confidential process to that point. But when you file the charge, it's still not open, like the public can't go online. Like if you file a court case, you know, people can go online and probably, well, I don't know in North Carolina if it's all electronically available, but in a lot of places you can go online, you can look it up, you can see if somebody has sued somebody. The EEOC process, up to that point that you actually do the charge, it's confidential. So like say you change your mind, you talk to one of our people and they're like, you know, actually you came to us too late. Your limitations period is expired. Are you sure you want to file? You can talk to us without your employer knowing. But then once you file a charge, then you know your employer has to be notified, and we do notify them, and then our process begins. And so your case might take different routes. You might get sent to mediation. We have a team of mediators who work for our agency, and they may help you, you know, more rapidly come to a resolution than you would through a whole investigation and litigation process. You know, maybe you'd like your job back. Maybe they decide to give you your job back. Or maybe there's some sort of monetary remedy. Maybe you just want an apology. Maybe you want your personnel file to not show that you were terminated. You know, there's all sorts of different remedies. Other things that we may negotiate are changes in policies and procedures. We might require the employer to give training to their managers to make sure it doesn't happen again. A lot of times when people come to us, yes, they want individual remedies, but they also, you know, they want to see that workplace improve. A lot of times people come to us who are still working there and want to keep working there. And so they don't, you know, they want not just a remedy for their situation, they want the place to be a better place to work. And of course, our goal as a government agency, and one of the reasons the process, it actually requires you to come to us before you go to court. You have to do something called exhaust your administrative remedies before you go to court. One of those reasons is so that the government can have a chance to not help you, but also to make sure that others are not discriminated against in that workplace. So you might go to mediation, you might, you know, we might go through an investigative process where we get what's called a position statement from the employer. We might call witnesses, we might go to the employer's site and take a look at what's going on. That can be especially helpful in disability cases, because like in the fair housing area, we get a lot of disability discrimination cases. And sometimes maybe the employer will be saying, well, that, you know, would just be an undue burden on us. We can't do that. Sometimes it can be really helpful to actually go to the workplace and understand the nature of the work enough to know whether or not accommodating that disability would truly be an undue burden or not. And then, you know, we're always trying. It's usually quicker and better if you don't have to go all the way to court. You know, going to court can take a long time, and it's stressful to have to keep, you know, because when you, like they talked in the first panel about how you have to be brave to come forward in a criminal case, you also have to be really brave in a civil case. Because, you know, once you start complaining about discrimination, then they're going to, you know, they may, you know, pull out really ugly things to say about you, to say, no, it's not that we discriminated, it's they were a really bad employee. And then you have to just keep, you know, thinking about that and rehearsing it and talking about it. So, you know, it's always better if you can resolve things sooner rather than later. But if we can't, and you have a strong case, you know, we only have so many resources to go to court, and go into court, you know, the government pays for it, but, you know, it takes resources as well as time. But if you have a strong case, we go to court. And, you know, you can go online and Google EEOC litigation and see the various court cases that we have brought. I've got a whole team of lawyers who works for our district. And so we do those civil actions in federal court. And so that's kind of the basics of the resources we provide. We also, do things like this, like outreach and education. I left a bunch of materials over there on the table. And so that's also a very important component of the resources we offer, is making sure that people know their rights.
Thank you, Betsy. And I forgot to mention earlier that I also work with Betsy at the EEOC in the Raleigh office, and so I know how hard the attorneys there work as part of the intake process to make sure that valid charges are investigated and that the EEOC does what it can to eradicate workplace discrimination. And so I'm going to turn to Kelly and Richard to talk about sort of the intake process within legal aid and the North Carolina Human Relations Commission, similar to what Betsy did. And so if I could turn to Kelly, if you could just walk us through, similarly, the intake process at legal aid.
Sure. Our intake process is actually in the process of getting a little revamped. A common thing that we hear, and we know it, is that it's very hard for people to get through to legal aid. We have a general intake line, and that's where people can call in at certain times. They can also do online and try to keep getting, get to an intake person. Something we're revamping now or launching is with artificial intelligence, but it's Leah, and that is someone that online or an app that will help with the intake process. So we're trying to we know that we cannot reach all the people that are trying to get to us, so we're trying to expand the reach. The reality is we don't have a lot of resources, but we are still trying to get, if we can't represent someone or provide legal assistance through representation, at least information and resources so that they can have that, whether that's going to file, a fair housing claim on their own, or an EEOC complaint, or something of that they at least can have that information. The other thing we have at Legal Aid is that we do have, for fair housing cases, a dedicated helpline. And how that differs from our general helpline is that, at least with the fair housing one, you can leave a voicemail and then get a call back within 72 hours. It's usually a lot quicker than that. But that's where someone we have in our centralized intake unit, that's where all generally the intakes happen at Legal Aid. We have one that, again, is the general hotline for non-fair housing cases, and then one specifically for fair housing. The fair housing one is where people can leave a message, which is key, and generally get a call back. And then generally with those, general is my word of the day right now, I don't mean for that to be, but anyway, we also have dedicated lines for senior law cases. We have the senior law helpline. So there are certain dedicated lines for specific areas that we do, but for the fair housing one, if a case gets through the intake, it's interviewed and so forth, we ask for all documentation, again, recordings, letters, and anything that will support the case. And then generally the case will be referred to one of our local offices. Again, we have 23 local offices across the state. And if there's a fair housing part to it, generally my office, which we go all over the state, we're not confined to one particular area, will get flagged for it to help with the local office if they need it. But we've had cases where one of our biggest fair housing cases, it was sex harassment. It's where we also were involved with the United States Department of Justice. It came in as one case. It came in as one person calling our intake line. And my former supervisor and always mentor picked up the phone when it came in. It was like, Kelly, there is this case. And out of that, we ended up representing 16 women, very brave women. And the United States Department of Justice was able to help 71 women. And this was in a rural area, but doesn't have to be rural. It can be urban, it can be anywhere, where it was a housing agency where their employees were demanding sexual favors from our clients in order to get their housing assistance. And when the lead plaintiff, and she was supposed to be here, but because of a medical emergency could not be here, when she went to a private attorney to get help for this case, the attorney said, well, come back to me when you have 10 other people. And so somehow she made it over to, it was actually an EEOC attorney, Title VII employment discrimination attorney. He swore all he would ever do would be employment discrimination, but then he got this call from this particular client, and while he still had his office in his bedroom, okay, he was just starting his law firm, he took the case on. And out of that, it was 2.7 million, all this injunctive relief and so forth. But, you know, for our involvement at Legal Aid, how we learned out, it was just the one person coming into our intake, and then my mentor that was in charge of the centralized intake unit picked up the phone to my project and said, Kelly, you got to hear about this case. So that's, you know, the power of what we were hearing earlier, you know, in the first panel about reporting, getting to people and so forth. I know, like I said, having been a legal aid attorney for almost 23 years, often I hear is that people can't get to us. But it's just those that do get to us are able to persevere. That's huge. So that's somewhat of our intake process. Again, we're looking to improve it. We are looking at ways to try and improve it.
Thank you, Kelly. Richard?
The NCHRC has a couple of different intake processes. The main one is for housing discrimination complaints, that is allegations of violations of the Fair Housing Acts. You can file that, or at least start what we call an inquiry to that in a number of ways. You can go to HUD's website, which is hud.gov/FHEO, Fair Housing Equal Opportunity, and you can file it directly with HUD. HUD will then send it to us as a state deferral agency if what you are alleging is actually a fair housing violation. You can also go to the North Carolina Office of Administrative Hearings website because we are a division of the Office of Administrative Hearings. You can simply Google North Carolina Human Relations Commission and you'll get our phone number and street address and the other things. When a fair housing case comes to us, it goes through a definite process. It is dual filed with us and with HUD. 90% of the time or more, HUD then defers the investigation to us. At the intake stage, all we are looking for is what legally is called a prima facie case. If what the person is telling us is completely true, and there is no other fact that we know of at that point that would defeat it, then we do an intake and we begin an investigation. Now, that does not mean we're going to find a violation by any means, but it is very easy to file a fair housing claim with us. If you go through HUD in the first place, they'll ask you the same questions, then they'll send it to us and we'll ask you the questions again. But you will get to start your case, most likely. Once we have a case, it gets assigned to one of our investigators. We try to finish all our investigations within 90 days. That's often not possible. Again, because, well, frankly, people who discriminate have gotten a lot smarter. And it's a lot harder to dig down and see what's really behind this HOA decision, what's really behind this raise in rent. They're not just going to come out and tell us anymore. We did have one case where they did some years ago. That was fun. And then our investigator will do an investigation that can include subpoenaing information. It will include witness interviews. It will include document requests from both you and whoever it is you are claiming discriminated against you. We will get that stuff. We have subpoena power to do it if necessary. most people, especially if they're represented by an attorney, most housing providers just go ahead and send us the stuff in the first place rather than go through a subpoena process. Then, when we have gotten all the evidence, including we always get what we call comparative evidence, which is we try to interview or otherwise get statistics on the other people who live in this apartment complex, in this HOA, in whatever organization it is. And do we see any statistical patterns where persons in protected classes are being treated differently from other people? So we find those various types of information. We do have a duty to try to conciliate cases. That is to find some settlement between the parties. This is different from a criminal law stand where the state is going to prosecute a person. We can only bring a civil action, and we do try to bring the parties together. Partly, this is just pretty standard in American law these days, but also we have a preference for not tearing neighborhoods apart if we can, not putting neighbors at each other's throats if we can. So if we can get an agreement that everybody signs off on, one, we generally don't have as much trouble after closing the case having to go back in and enforce the agreements because everybody has agreed. But also it's a chance to get the two sides to come to something that is not all-out litigation, which tends to harden everyone's attitudes. We will absolutely litigate cases, and we do. But only when we have already at least tried to settle the case. So if we go through the investigation, we find that there has been discrimination as defined by the law, and we cannot bring this case to settlement, we will file suit in the Superior Court of North Carolina in the county in which the offense occurred or the property generally is. And we'll go anywhere. I'm still finishing up a case one county over from here in Rayford. We've also been for cases, Kelly and I did one out in Asheville not too long ago.
Swananoa.
Yes, Swananoa.
I just love saying that word, but Swananoa.
And I have personally not taken a case to Murphy, but I have done a case in Manio. So I've almost made it the whole way. We'll go anywhere and we'll do it, except we do not have jurisdiction under the North Carolina state law wherever there is a local agency that, like us, is recognized by HUD as a fair housing assistance program. In North Carolina, these municipalities have those. The city of Durham, the city of Greensboro, the city of Winston-Salem, the city of Charlotte, and all of Mecklenburg County, which is not otherwise incorporated. And what's the other one?
City of Asheville.
Oh, yes, city of, no, not city of Asheville. No.
Orange County.
Orange County, thank you. So in those places, we would simply send you to a local version of our own commission, who themselves have support from HUD, who have legal authority to do the same things we do, essentially. But with those distinctions, we go everywhere in the state.
And can I just say one more thing about our process? I should have mentioned that at the end of our process, even if we decide we're not going to continue investigating your claim, or say, we do find that there was cause to believe there was discrimination, but it's not a case we're going to litigate, at the end, you're going to get, if you're a victim of discrimination who's filed a charge with us, you're going to get a notice of right to sue. So I just should note, the EEOC is not the end of the story. So even if, for instance, we just don't have enough resources to move forward with your particular charge, what you are going to get at the end is not something that says, you didn't have a good case, you're done. What you're going to get is a notice of right to sue. And what that shows is that you did exhaust your administrative remedies, and now you can go to court. You can represent yourself, you can find a lawyer, and so you still have, the whole United States legal system at your disposal to pursue your charge. You're not just limited to the EEOC as a source of relief.
And let me say also, both the state and federal Fair Housing Acts have similar provisions. So if we find no reasonable cause to believe that the North Carolina Fair Housing Act has been violated, you still have every right within the next 2 years of filing your own suit with your own counsel. You can do it without an attorney, but we highly recommend that you get one. They're not easy cases to litigate.
Thank you. So I think all of you touched on it briefly, but I wanted to ask about sort of the experience of being an unrepresented individual throughout the intake process and what that potentially looks like within the agencies that you represent, and sort of the resources for those individuals within this process.
So you mean within like legal aid when someone is calling? Yeah, I mean most of people that are calling for us for legal aid, they don't have counsel. They're looking for counsel. In legal aid, we represent people based on income. It's on federal poverty guidelines set out by the Legal Services Corporation that can qualify for our services for income and assets. However, we have some exceptions to that. For instance, if someone is a victim of domestic violence, we don't have to look at income. If people are a certain age, if they are within what's considered to be elderly, if we have certain funding streams called Title III, we don't have to look at income, as well as for our fair housing cases with our HUD grants, we don't have to look at income for those. So that's huge, because we've had instances where we had a funding gap. In that case that I was talking about, that race harassment case that I worked on, there was a time where we didn't have our HUD funding, and our clients were just a little bit over the federal poverty guidelines. But we had, because it involved elder abuse, we were able to use a certain pot of money so that we could, until we got our HUD funding back, we could work on that case. But generally speaking, people are coming to us to work on, they're looking for an attorney in some type of representation capacity for a variety of cases, but particularly what I'm involved in is fair housing. People that have suffered discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex. Sex also includes gender identity and sexual orientation, disability, familial status, people have children and so forth. And under our State Fair Housing Act, we have another protected category, which is the development of affordable housing. The general rule is, state and local ordinances can have more areas of discrimination. That's, that people are protected against, but they can't have less. So we actually, under our State Fair Housing Act, do have the protection of the development of affordable housing. So we have actually, as a project, at the Fair Housing Project, sued cities and towns that have said, we don't want that affordable housing complex in our town limits. So that's a case that we have also brought. But we do get clients who have started the administrative process, whether, we represent clients in enforcement in court, but also in the administrative realm. And so filing a HUD complaint or a complaint with they're called a Fair Housing Assistance Program, a FAP. There's a lot of these FIPS, FAPs. I'm a FIP, we're a Fair Housing Initiative Program, but if it's HUD or a FAP, like the North Carolina Human Relations Commission, it's an administrative complaint. So we do represent clients in that process as well. Often we will have, and I think it's been an uptick in this, is that clients have already started that process before they get to us. They've already filed a HUD complaint on their own, and then they come to us for assistance in that. Most of our clients have not filed a lawsuit yet on their behalf, and then looking for us to assist them, but it's mostly the HUD complaints where they have already, or the Fair Housing Administrative complaints that they have filed on their own that they're looking for our assistance.
Yeah. Our situation is a little different. We bring in the case, we of course take the cases and process them as I described before, with a thorough investigation and attempts to conciliate. However, even if we find that there is reasonable cause to believe that the Fair Housing Act has been violated, it is the North Carolina Human Relations Commission, on behalf of the state, that files the lawsuit for the benefit of the person who's been person or persons who have been discriminated against. That creates a fundamental difference between what Kelly does and what I do. I am the attorney for the state. The state of North Carolina is my client when I go into court. And the state of North Carolina wants to get rid of the housing discrimination. The state of North Carolina may or may not think the best way to do that is to get a huge monetary award, but most of the complainants who come to us think that that's probably the best way that they can stop things. And we have to tell them, this is our case. However, we will refer you to places where you may be able to get an attorney and you can intervene as an individual in this lawsuit. And then you can make your own settlement agreement with us or without us. But we represent the state of North Carolina. And that's a fundamental difference between what most attorneys are doing when they're in a civil suit in court, where there's someone who has been, a citizen who's been injured.
So the case that we worked on together, even though our client was the one that filed the complaint, you all found cause, filed the lawsuit, we then intervened. We represented the person and intervened in that case, so she could have more of a seat at the table in the negotiations and in the lawsuit. But that's how, when Richard was saying how we worked together, that was in that type of capacity.
And it's a good point to bring up, because a lot of times I do find people get confused about what the EEOC's role is. They think we are on their side, but we're on everybody's side. We are a neutral fact finder. When these charges come into us, we are neutrally investigating them to see if discrimination occurred. And so I do find sometimes people, kind of come in and think we're their attorney, and we are not their attorney. We are a neutral fact finder. Now, when it gets to the point that the EEOC has actually found that there was discrimination, at that point, we're not neutral anymore. We did find there was discrimination, and at that point, that's when we would go into court on the basis of that finding. But up until we've made that finding, we are neutral. So, sometimes, the charging party might, think that we need to conduct the investigation just the way they want us to, and that we should be interviewing, many, many witnesses that maybe we have decided, are not necessary for the investigation. If they had an attorney, and they're willing to pay for it, the attorney, they can maybe tell the attorney how to proceed. But we're conducting a neutral investigation of those charges. And so that's a really important factor. And, quite a few people come to us and have counsel. Quite a few people come to us and don't have counsel. Like I said, when I was talking about our intake process, it's really supposed to be designed to be accessible to everyone. And we try to do everything we can to make sure that everybody is able to present their case. And I would note, for instance, over 25% of my staff is bilingual, and that includes my management team. So one thing that's really important to us, and that is a strategic priority of the EEOC, is, like you're talking about, going everywhere. We really do try to get out. We prioritize expanded presence outreach. We try to do intake in places outside of our offices. We try to go out into communities that might not be able to get, it's really expensive to park, for instance, in Charlotte, if you need to come in instead of file online. And so we try to be very accessible in that way. We run into people who just can't use a computer for various reasons. We will provide services to help people. It's very hard in this world to get by without being able to use a computer well, or to have access to a computer. But, we try to provide every means possible to be available to people, whether they have an attorney or not. But we are not their attorney.
Thank you, Betsy. I think you touched on briefly just sort of something that the previous panel talked about. So if I'm experiencing a housing discrimination issue or employment discrimination issue, potentially I'm scared to come to these agencies. And Betsy talked about the language access available within the EEOC, going out into communities where folks might feel more comfortable filing these charges. I wanted to ask Richard and Kelly whether there was something similar within either legal aid or the North Carolina Human Relations Commission to help these individuals feel comfortable as they're filing these charges.
Well, for us, as part of the judicial branch of the North Carolina government in the Office of Administrative Hearings, we can provide translation resources if necessary. We do have a fluent Spanish speaker on our staff, and we try to always have someone at least who can speak Spanish fluently on our staff or readily available. But if it is a different language, we will try to find, and there's somebody in North Carolina who can translate it for you, we will try to find them. We will also, if you are disabled, we can come to you if necessary. Our building is handicap accessible, as public buildings are supposed to be, but we can also come to you if necessary. We often come to the place anyway if there is an evidentiary reason for us to come and actually view the property. For instance, a recent case involved a disabled woman who needed a handicap parking space, even though she already had a driveway of her own, because the driveway was on the slope, and there were various different complications to the situation. And we went out there several times. We even hired some engineers to measure the slopes for us and that kind of thing. So we will do what we need to adequately and legally and neutrally investigate and come to a conclusion about your case. And if we find that there has been discrimination, we will find the resources to be able to either make it stop or take it to court.
On that part, I would say about how witnesses, helping with witnesses or clients, big thing I have found in my career is like you have someone that comes forward, has the bravery to come forward, but they need to stay forward, right? They need to stay forward in a case like one can take 3-4 years and so forth. So I take that really seriously about trying to help support the clients as well as the witnesses that are supporting my client's story about how they can stay forward. And so a lot of times I'm out in the field. I had a really good friend of mine who says, Kelly, you know, when she did a presentation for our organization, was that in moments of crisis, in moments like, and you're telling me to get to the office and bring this, I'm just recalculating. And sometimes you just need to come to me. So a lot, you know, for that sex harassment case that I worked on, I lived a lot out of my car. My office was my car, the courthouse was my office, the local library was my office, just going, trying to find the witnesses and to keep them forward, because the other side wants to just, you know, wants them to just kind of, you know, fall away. But a lot of it is just providing that support, be that in person, a lot of that preparation, just being available and being present and going into the field and showing your commitment, but also just making it easier for the clients and for the witnesses. So a lot of what I do, I'm out doing in-person visits and, you know, just traveling the state to just keep those connections, because, you know, it's hard for people to come forward to say something so horrible that has happened to them, but it's also, you got to develop this relationship with them and to earn that trust. And so then more information does come out, but then you can really fight for them and to keep them at the table and to keep them forward so that they can hopefully get the justice that they really, really deserve and are entitled to.
Well, and I would also add, under both the state and federal Fair Housing Acts and all the local fair housing ordinances, it is a separate offense to harass or intimidate or retaliate against someone because they have filed a fair housing complaint. We have had cases that the underlying complaint was not really about fair housing, and we would not have done much with it, but the housing provider or the HOA or some other, or neighbor who's been complained about, just flips out and starts harassing the person just for coming to us. You know, they double their rent, they, you know, whatever it might be. They put things out on the HOA website about what a terrible person they are. That's retaliation, and that's a separate offense. And we will absolutely add that to our investigation, and we will bring suit about it if we find that there has been retaliation.
Thank you, Richard. I think we are out of time, but really wanted to thank Kelly, Richard, and Betsy for sharing the resources available within their agencies. I know they'll be here for a couple more minutes or throughout the day, so feel free to reach out to them or the agency itself if you need more information about those resources. Thank you.
Also, I want to make you aware that at this table that's to my right, there are some resources from the North Carolina Human Relations Commission, the U.S. EEOC, as well as the U.S. DOJ Community Relations Services, and the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Eastern District. So if you would, when you get ready to go on your break, just go to the table and get some of those resources so that you can take them back to your local communities and let people know that there is some information out there if they need to contact one of these agencies today. We will take a 10-minute break, get prepared for the Honorable Michael Easley Jr. to come up. But if you would take a 10-minute break, we will ask you to be back here in 10:42. Now I'd like to introduce to you everyone here, the Honorable Michael F. Easley Jr., U.S. Attorney, Eastern District of North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina, and he is the person that represents this area. So with Mr. Easley would come forward, and let's give him a hand.
Thank you so much. It is so nice to be here surrounded by so many good people. You know, as a federal prosecutor, we don't always spend our time with the good people. But we do want to spend our time with those who need us the most. We, along with you, are the folks who run to the lost, who run to the dark corners where folks would prefer not to pay attention, who go and shine a light where there is darkness and give hope where there is fear, give kindness where there has been cruelty, and mend and help to heal those who have been harmed. And I hope what you take away from today is that that is what fundamentally makes us human. When one of us hurts, we all are called to act. And it's in that fundamental truth that we begin to see that in the hardships that are inflicted on so many, and in the traumas that an individual can bear, we, as a community, when we wrap them up to process that trauma, can turn that pain into fuel for change. That is a powerful notion. And everybody in this room knows it. Many of you have felt it. Some have been on the receiving end of these hardships that you never should have had to have dealt with, but you learned that you could use that as fuel to make a difference for somebody else and shine that light and make it ever brighter to cast forward a path to a brighter future. To be in a room like this, so full of so many who are so committed to make this community, this state, this nation, this world a place that is free from hate, that is free from violence, where our differences are celebrated and not ostracized. That is a humbling thing for me. If everybody forgets my name when I'm out of this job, but they remember the work that you have done, it will be a win. I will be proud to have served. President Biden appointed me to this role 3 years ago. And one of the first things I did when I came into this office was designate this district's, Eastern North Carolina's first dedicated civil rights team of federal prosecutors devoted to making this district safer, more fair, and more free for every single American who lives here. Everybody. That civil rights team is led by the one and only Jennifer May Parker, who's in the room today. A special prosecutions unit fueled by some of the brightest legal minds this district has seen. They work around the clock. They take calls anytime, anywhere there is a threat of harm to one of our citizens, especially based on an immutable characteristic like race or gender, sexual orientation. All the factors that make us unique and human, make us special, those special differences that make us the nation that we are, have to be protected, and we are dedicated to doing that. You heard this morning from our partners at the Community Relations Service within the Department of Justice. And many don't know, but the Department of Justice was founded, our very DNA, 150 years ago, specifically to protect the rights of Black Americans after the Civil War. During Reconstruction, when the rise of the Ku Klux Klan was creating lawlessness and fear and impinging on the rights of American citizens, Black Americans, the Justice Department was created specifically to fulfill that vision that all men and women are created equal. And when it was denied, our Congress acted and created the Justice Department that we now represent in Eastern North Carolina. Fighting for the victims of hate crimes is in our DNA, and we are putting it in the heartland of our mission once again. Many of you know that it's never been more important. We see little bubbles of hate popping up here and there in our country at points in our history that are critical. We're in one of those points right now. And many just sit and watch it on TV and they say, well, why don't they do something about that? Well, you are they. You are those who are empowered to do something about it. And you heard from our law enforcement partners this morning on what they do, but you're about to hear from real victims of real hate crimes, of real discrimination who raised their voice and turned that pain into fuel for change. Hate and violence cannot impinge upon our right to worship, to dream, and to live free. We will not bend. We will not compromise. everybody's right to make good on the American dream. We see time and again when we give voice to victims, we can turn victims into survivors, and those survivors can become our heroes, and their stories can drive real change. So we'll keep elevating those voices of the voiceless. We'll keep putting them on platforms like this because they're the ones who inspire us. They're the ones who will help us make a difference, and one victim's voice can transform a community. And we can turn their degradation into the elevation of every single one of us. We can turn an act of hate into an avenue towards hope when we process that grief together as a community and we let our justice system do the work. So we gather today as one community with one vision for a place where all people can live and work and worship and enjoy the fruits of their labor without fear of violence and intimidation for simply being who they are. So when you leave here today, I want you to leave empowered and with a strong sense of community and knowing that the American people have got your backs, that law enforcement has got your backs, and that we in the Justice Department know our mission. We know the assignment. And we're going to make good on it for every one of you and everybody you represent and everybody who thought they wouldn't have a fighting chance at the American dream. It has been said that the arc of the moral universe is long. Dr. King said that. But it bends towards justice. But that arc don't bend on its own. It bends because each of you have had a firm hand in bending that arc. Today is just another day on a long march towards justice. So let's lean into it, folks. And let's use these victim stories we're about to hear as the motivation to change and elevate our station in life and on this mission towards the American dream. Thank you all so very much for what you do every day.